How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Turned Into a Nomu, the movie. And now, before we begin, I would just like to ask you all to please put your what if suggestions down in the comments section below. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. Izuku Midoriya, son of Inko Midoriya and Toshin Yagi. Inko would be holding her there, smiling down as Toshinori Yagi, otherwise known as his hero name All Might, would be staring down at his son. He now has sort of an heir to his quirk, at least if Izuku wants to become a hero and to save people just like he had wanted to. So, as All Might would be staring down at him, he would immediately get a call saying that he has to go do hero work. No one in the doctor's office knew that it was him, as his just real identity had been kept a secret all throughout his time as a hero. So he would stand up, bid his wife farewell before running off to go do hero work somewhere else to save lives. As Inko would frown down that her husband wasn't there to see his own child's life for more than 5 minutes, but that's hero work for you, and he's at least going to save people for the common good, or for the greater good, that is, so she couldn't really be too mad. 4 years would now pass, as All Might is just absent from Izuku's life entirely. All Might had decided to just not break things up, but he decided it would be best if he were to live on a different location, so to not warn or just hurt the lives of Inko and his child, Izuku. He didn't want to threaten their lives in any way, so he knew he couldn't live with them. If he were, villains possibly might find them and use them as hostages and possibly kill them just to strike back at All Might. And so All Might knew it was for their better, so that they were to live separately. Inko wouldn't really like this decision, but she was okay with it, as long as they're still alive, and All Might comes to visit them from time to time. So with that, we now see a young Izuku Midoriya at the age of 4 running around his house, as today is his birthday. "It's my birthday, it's my birthday," he would yell, rushing around the room, as his mother would be seen walking down the steps to go look at the child. "Calm down, Izuku, calm down," she would say, trying to calm the energetic boy, as Izuku would rush over to her yelling, "Can we go to the quirk doctor? I can't wait to see what quirk I have." He would yell, jumping in the air, pumping his fist, just yelling he couldn't wait to become a hero, and he couldn't wait to see what powerful quirk he had. He just couldn't wait. He had tons of All Might merchandise, as All Might was his favorite hero. He wanted to be like All Might so bad, and so he wanted to see what his quirk was, so that he could know he was going to be another All Might. He was going to be someone that everyone looked up to and just wanted to be saved from. He was going to save millions of people, at least that's what a young Izuku had thought. So Inko would get everything ready before grabbing the young boy's hand, pulling him into the car, setting him down in his car seat, as they would then drive off to the quirk doctor's office. As Izuku would be generally just sitting in his chair, bouncing around with tons of energy, the doctor would walk into the room holding a clipboard. An Izuku Midoriya," he would say. Izuku's name, along with Inko's, had been changed just to hide their identity even further. Inko was kind of suspicious about all of this, but her husband was All Might after all. So with that, Inko would be taken along with Izuku into a small private room where the doctor would perform some tests, as he would then come back moments later. Sadly, there's no good news that I have to share with you. This may be tough to hear for young Izuku along with you, Inko, but Izuku Midoriya, you don't have a quirk at all. You're quirkless, the doctor would say, as the cold words of the doctor would pierce right through Izuku's heart, shattering his dreams into millions of tiny little pieces, as Izuku would stare on in utter shock. He couldn't believe it. "I'm quirkless? What?" Izuku would say, just staring off into space as the All Might figure he was twirling around in his hand dropped to the floor, as one of the arms would just break off, as Izuku would stare down at the figure as tears would start coming out of his eyes. He would look up smiling towards his mother, just staring on towards her. I could still become a hero, right, Mom? Izuku would say, stuttering towards her, as she would look on down towards her own child, not sure what to say. Should she tell him the truth, or should she lie to him? Either way, she'd feel guilty afterwards about her answer. She just didn't know what to say. As the doctor would then leave the room, saying that they can now go home and that he has nothing else that he can tell them. Inko would reach down as Izuku would grab her hand tightly, as she would then drag Izuku to the car, setting him down as they would then drive off. Izuku would ask to see one of the All Might videos he loved watching of him saving tons of people, as Izuku would just be staring at the screen as Inko would come in as tears were flowing out of her eyes. She would hug her child, just endlessly mumbling to herself, repeating the same words. "I'm sorry I failed you, Izuku," over and over and over again. As Izuku would look on towards his mother, just completely heartbroken at what his mother had been saying to him. She had just didn't make any sense. Izuku, a 4-year-old child, just had his entire world completely crumbled within his grasp. And now his own mother's saying that she failed him? Izuku just couldn't comprehend everything that they were saying. It just didn't make sense to him. As we now cut to see the doctor closing out his shift, walking into a strange warehouse after parking in a completely just abandoned location. All for one, I think we found the perfect test subject to begin with the full-scale testing or those experiments I was talking to you about, the doctor would say on towards All for One, who would smile down towards the doctor. Oh, you think you found the perfect test subject, do you? Do you mind explaining to me what this subject is and who they are? Their name's Izuku Midoriya, a recently announced corkless boy that I've just tested today, actually. See, now that we've tested a few of these projects on a couple of other people and found some quite good evidence of things we shouldn't be doing, but we all tested on people that already had quirks. I have a superstition that someone who's quirkless could possibly have a limitless potential. We could give them limitless amounts of quirks. All for One would stare intently on at the doctor, who continued on rambling on, just in fascination about what he could do with all these experiments that were just kept up inside his mind. So All for One would continue on. Now, can you tell me who this boy is again? Oh, it's Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya. That name kind of sounds familiar. You remember All Might's family, correct? I remember just seeing about them after one of the research teams found out about his true identity. Toshinori Yagi. Of course, I've known that from the beginning, but I didn't bother finding out if he was married at all. And just so happens he is, to Inko Midoriya, and he just so happens to have a son, Izuku. Oh, imagine the look on his face when he finds his rival, the villain he's been trying to defeat all of his life, just happened to turn his only son into a villain, into a Nomu, a brainless thing going to tear him down from the inside. It's perfect, All for One would say as the doctor would then smile towards him. So, I guess we're agreed on this. Now we just have to find out how we're going to kidnap him, do we? The doctor would say as All for One would nod his head. Alright, so, let's start making up a plan then, shall we? All for One would say as the doctor would nod their head. As all for one would be doing this, we now cut back to see Izuku just sleeping up in his bed, staring up at his ceiling, as all of the stars, just star stickers that would glow at night, were just staring on down at Izuku. So he was just staring right up at him, like his dream was all the way up there and had just fallen down, as one of the stars would fall down right on him, hitting him square in the head. So Izuku would only pick it up before flinging it across the room. So he would just calmly shake his head before falling back to sleep, just completely confused. He didn't know what to do anymore. Of course, he was still a young child, so he didn't know how to react as much as he possibly would have if he were to be older. So, with that, we now cut to see a few days later. We see Izuku walking into school as all of the students would be surrounding Bakugo Katsuki, who had recently just awakened his quirk, as pops and all of this tiny crackles would come out of Bakugo's hands, flying as sparks would go everywhere. He had recently awoken his explosion quirk, as he would marvel down at it. Izuku would stare at them before many of them would ask Izuku, since he had recently turned 4, what his quirk is, asking if he had awoken it yet, or if it has awakened yet. However, Izuku would shake his head as tears would start forming up into his eyes, just saying, I don't have a quirk. At least that's what the doctor said. My mom said there's still a small chance that I'll get a quirk later, though. Many of the kids would stare on towards the optimistic Izuku, as many of them would just burst into laughter. Oh, please! You know once the doctor says you're quirkless, there's no chance of you getting a quirk. Stop all of that mumbling, Izuku. You know you're quirkless forever. Bakugo was the lead in this attack, just laughing at the powerless, useless Izuku, saying that he was destined for failure now, not having a special power like the rest of them. As Izuku would stare off in complete shock, as all of the friends he had built up had just started eating into Izuku, as he could feel himself falling down into a dark abyss, as he just didn't know what was happening. That night, when he was returned back to home from the bus, dropped off, Izuku would walk into school telling his mother about the things they had said, as his mother would start crying, saying that they aren't true, that he isn't useless. However, all of a sudden they would hear a knock on the door, as Inko would go over, reaching for the doorknob, opening it, as a silver-haired figure would walk into the room, staring down at Inko, as Inko would stare up at him, just confused. Hello? Who are you? She would ask, however, there would be no response, so the figure would reach out their long arm, grabbing her head before throwing her, tossing her across the room, as she would slam into the wall, creating a small dent, as the figure would walk on towards Izuku. Ah, there's little Midoriya, the figure would say, as Izuku was now cowering back, completely scared and frightened about who this was. They had just hurt his mother, after all. So they would reach down, picking Izuku up, as he would start struggling, crying, yelling out for someone to help him. However, the son's hand would be placed over his mouth, holding it tight, so no sounds would come out of it. As Izuku would be taken away from his mother, she would be staring on, shock, reaching out, yelling for Izuku. However, Izuku couldn't do anything to stop it. He was far too weak. He didn't even have a quirk to defend himself. As all of this would be happening, this silver-haired figure would bring Izuku down and sit him down into a dark room after going into a portal. As the torture would begin, as the doctor would be the head of it, completely breaking down Izuku and building him back up, just molding him into what he wanted him to be. 10 years of this would end up passing, as all it took was just around 2 weeks to break Izuku fully, to the point where he just couldn't do anything anymore. He had lost his mother, and his memories of her had already started to fade after 2 weeks. Izuku was
after all the bullying he had faced that first day, he had already been broken enough, but now this doctor taking away from his mother, breaking him down, and just completely destroyed him, as Izuku was now known better than one of those mindless Nomus. However, Izuku still had his thoughts. He could still think to himself. However, he just was broken. He didn't know what to do anymore. So the doctor would build him back up, giving him different types of quirks at just the word of All For One, as All For One had given Izuku a hyper regeneration quirk, as they would start to test it, just injuring Izuku in certain ways, watching it as it would heal back. As this would be happening, Izuku would feel all the pain as it would start to heal, as the doctor would walk into All For One's office. So, All For One, what do you plan on giving, like other types of quirks, to the Midoriya? He would say, talking as if Izuku was just sort of an object and not a living being, as All For One would stare down at the doctor before thinking. Well, we already have a hyper regeneration quirk on it. We could possibly give it a shock nullification type of quirk, along with a strength quirk. That would make it one of, all the other Nomus, though. You said this one's different, didn't you? All For One would say, questioning the doctor, as the doctor would nod his head vigorously. Oh yes, this one I think has the most potential out of all of them. Remember, it's quirkless after all, the doctor would say, as All For One would nod his head. Okay. Do you think we should focus all of our attention and moves on it, making it sort of one of these super Nomu, having just a bunch of quirks and using it as a day-to-day object, basically? All For One would say, as the doctor would think for a moment before nodding his head. Oh, yes, we could possibly do that. It wouldn't have any limitations due to his quirklessness. At least that's what I believe. But it still could. Remember, we've only given him one quirk after all. We just have to see what happens after giving him a second and third quirk. The nullification could possibly help his regeneration, though, possibly nullifying the pain, so that the regeneration could possibly go faster without the limitations of him screaming all the time. All For One would think for a moment before nodding his head. Okay, why don't I give him some of the quirks now? Alright, let's go ahead and try it. All For One would walk on towards the child before placing his hand on Izuku's head, as he would instantly transfer in a bunch of quirks into him. A warp type of quirk that could open up portals, a lightning quirk that allowed you to throw thunderbolts, a strength quirk along with a shock nullification quirk, the same shock nullification quirk and strength quirk that they were going to give to the USJ Nomu. However, the Nomu project had now had the Midoriya in it, as All For One would transfer into them before walking off. Why don't you allow Midoriya to go ahead and play with the other Nomus? It'd be quite the training exercise, don't you think, Doctor? All For One would say, as the doctor would question All For One's word before agreeing to it, letting Izuku into the Nomu room, telling the Nomus to attack Izuku, and to not stop until Izuku had defeated them all. As Izuku, being pushed in there, would stare up just all at the Nomus. All of the fear he had faced in the 2 weeks had completely been gone. His emotions had been completely broken, and he just didn't have them anymore. He was just emotionless. So a blank stare would form on Izuku's face, looking up at all of the Nomus, would then stare down at Izuku before rushing at him. These Nomus were not perfected at all, as they had still been prototypes after all. Izuku was sort of a passion project for the Doctor and All For One, the first perfected Nomu. However, they forgot to do one thing in their torture. They hadn't made sure Izuku had lost all of his free will. Izuku still had the free will, and so he could still think for himself. But the 4-year-old, after being scared for 2 weeks, just decided that he should go along with everything that these people said. And so Izuku would do this, completely decimating all of the Nomus as they would try to attack him. However, Izuku, now with his newfound quirks, would start to experiment, just throwing lightning bolts all around her, punching these Nomus, as Izuku would tear them to shreds, getting sort of just joy out of all of this. It was the one thing that made sort of Izuku happy, as he had nothing else that was fun. This was the only thing. Sure, it wouldn't be fun to normal 4-year-old Izuku. However, Izuku had just been left sitting in a dark, abandoned room and had only seen like 3 people through 6 years of all of this. And so Izuku finally got something to do. And Izuku would finally just do all of this, and just destroying the Nomus is when the doctor and All For One walked in. They would be completely satisfied with what Izuku had managed to do. It looks like he's ready. But do you think you should give him sort of an intelligence quirk? The doctor would ask, as All For One would look on towards him. An intelligence quirk, you say? What do you mean by that? All For One would say, questioning the doctor, as the doctor would just sort of laugh. Oh, you know Shigaraki, your apprentice of yours. Quite the rash one he is. What if he gives Midoriya sort of a dumb order that could possibly get Shigaraki along with this project that we've already spent 6 years on in danger, and possibly killing them or getting him captured, allowing for research from the heroes? He should at least have some intelligence not to obey stupid orders from Shigaraki. I suppose you do have a point. Shigaraki is quite the one to act out on his own anger. Alright, so we give him an intelligence quirk. I'm sure it can't be too bad. All For One would say, reaching down, giving Izuku another quirk, adding to his ever-growing collection. As For One would then just look down towards the doctor. I'd suppose that'd be the limit. I don't think we should do anything else. It might just become brain dead after that. And we don't want all those quirks to go to waste, as once they go brain dead, I can't get the quirks back. So let's just leave it at that. All For One would say, as the doctor would nod his head. Okay, fine. I guess this Nomu has reached its limits, hasn't it? The doctor would say, as All For One would nod his head. We now see Izuku walking back over towards wherever he was supposed to be, as the doctor would stop him. Whoa, Midoriya, where do you think you're going? You should probably use your portal quirk to get to the bar. You remember me showing it to you. It's our main location, after all. Why don't you go ahead and use your portals? Izuku would open up a portal in front of him, as both the doctor and Izuku would step right through it, as they would now be at the bar, or the main villain location. Who all that sat there was a younger Shigaraki, who, remember, still older by a bit than Izuku, so he would be sitting there and would then see Izuku walk in. Who's this? Shigaraki would say, not having been just introduced to Izuku, as the doctor would say, oh, this is Izuku. He's just going to be here to make sure that nothing stupid happens or silly. Think of him as your protector, after all, Shigaraki. Shigaraki would stare on towards Izuku, as Shigaraki would then just say, okay, just make sure they don't get in my way if I'm trying to do something. The doctor would then just nod his head. You hear that, Izuku? Doctor would ask towards Izuku, would blankly stare at both Shigaraki and the doctor. Alright, he would say. It was one of the first times he had ever spoken in the years he'd been with the villains. As another 4 years would end up passing with Izuku practicing with his quirks, getting better and better at them, as he still was human, but he had just been twisted by all of the torture and pain and suffering that he had gone through, causing him just not to act like one, but he still looked just like one. However, there were scars littering his body up and down from being injured by some of the Nomus or with his regeneration quirk training. So, with all of that happening, we end up seeing Shigaraki talking to Izuku, who was fixing him just a glass of water, putting ice in glass before giving it to Shigaraki. Alright, Izuku. Are you ready to finally go attack UA? Izuku would stare on towards Shigaraki before answering. Oh, yes, of course. Well, I finally get to use my quirks instead of just being on those stupid, brainless Nomus. Izuku would say as Shigaraki would just sort of laugh. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait for you to kill that stupid number one hero, too. I know you've been training quite hard for you to do that, haven't you? Shigaraki would say as Izuku would just nod his head. Think it's going to be quite easy. Heard All For One had managed to injure him some years back. So let's just hope All Might's just quite a bit weaker than what those sources say, with him being stronger than ever after all. It's just so stupid, Izuku would say, as Izuku had been with the villains so long that his entire just thought process, all of the times he said he wanted to become a hero and save people, and his mother, his father, they'd been completely forgotten about. Izuku no longer remembered who those people were. All he knew was the fake story that All For One had told him. It wasn't actually fake. All Might was his father, and he had abandoned Izuku, and that's when All For One found Izuku, the abandoned person. Since that heartless All Might had decided to abandon his family along with him, Izuku, and All For One had came by and saved Izuku from just being cast out and left on the streets as a homeless child. So Izuku would start to hate the hero world. How could the number one hero abandon such a child? It just didn't make any sense. It was so stupid of him, all just to not be held back and be just destroyed by the media for having a child. Izuku would hate All Might for this and start growing the hatred that Shigaraki had as well, to kill All Might. And so the training would continue with Izuku now having a goal after everything that had happened, as after just a year with Izuku being in the villains, Izuku would have completely forgotten about his mother, and after just around 10 years, there was no traces of even that memory still in Izuku. He just completely forgot about it, like it was snapped out of his brain entirely. It just didn't exist to him. You ready, Izuku? Shigaraki would say on towards Izuku as he would just nod his head. Today is finally the day that All Might stops existing, Izuku would say, cracking his knuckles before creating a portal in front of Shigaraki, as they would then go to a warehouse that housed tons of villains, thousands of them even. As Izuku would create a massive portal, there's all of them would start filing through the portal as Izuku and Shigaraki would step through at last. Kirigiri had no need to be created because there was just no need for another person with a warp core. Izuku already had one. As Izuku creating it, both Izuku and Shigaraki would stare on towards just All Might, or not All Might, the UA students, as all of them would be staring on, as Aizawa would tell all of them to stay back, as he would jump down before starting to defeat all of the villains there, just beating them one by one, at least trying to. However, Izuku would create a portal beneath him, as he would end up making it right up towards where all of the students of UA were standing. As Izuku would be standing there, he would blend in perfectly. However, many people would start to realize, who is this? Hello, UA students. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm Izuku, Izuku would say, as that name would strike right through the head of someone that was there. A Bakugo Katsuki. He remembered that name, Izuku. It was the name of a kid that went missing like 10 years ago or so. He would think, as Izuku would just be standing there in front of all of them. It's nice to meet you all. It's also nice to say that many of you will probably either be injured today or won't make it out of this USJ, or whatever this building happens to be. So, I wish you all luck on your endeavors, Izuku would say before creating a portal beneath all of them, as many of them would try to jump out of the way. However, it was too late, falling directly into the portal below, as they all just disappear into it, being spread out throughout the different zones. Izuku, using his intelligence quirk, had even told Shigaraki it'd be smarter if they just did more research and planted people with the right amount of quirks in a certain area, and did research on the UA students even, and placed them in their zone that they'd be the weakest in. As Izuku would be saying this, Shigaraki would have nodded his head at this, but this would be months back, and so that planning had already happened, and so all of that had happened already as well. And so with that, there would just be villains there to compensate for the villains or heroes that just didn't do so well with their quirks in a certain area, like Tsuyu Asui in the Fire Zone. So Izuku would be just warped back to wherever Shigaraki was, as he would see Aizawa had defeated the entire horde of villains already. Using his quirk and just other people's quirks against the crowd, he had managed to defeat almost 1,000 villains. As he was now coming straight for Shigaraki, before he could do so, Izuku would step in his way, slamming both of his hands down into Aizawa's head before picking Aizawa's head up and slamming his knee right into Aizawa's stomach, before throwing Aizawa right across the USJ, slamming him into the stairs that were directly behind him. As Aizawa would look up, trying to get up, as he would see Izuku coming right towards him, however he would stop right in front of him, winding his hand back as a thunderbolt would be directly in Izuku's hand, as he would throw it right into Aizawa. So he would make direct contact, electrocuting Aizawa, just knocking him out completely. As Izuku would look around, just standing there with Shigaraki, as minutes would end up passing, as villains would end up returning back to the middle with just unconscious UA students there, as Izuku would end up creating a portal before teleporting them where a villain in a warehouse would tie them up and just put them somewhere else in a just warehouse where they're going to be housed, just to try to get them to turn into villains or other sorts of things like Nomus. The villains that had been taken were unknown towards Izuku and Shigaraki at that moment. So as 20 minutes within the USJ would end up passing, they had captured 5 students and brought them back to a certain warehouse to be just determined what they are going to do with them. As all of a sudden the doors would be smashed open, as there lied All Might, just not smiling at all, as he would stare down at Izuku, just in the center of the USJ, along with Shigaraki, as Izuku would then yell up towards him. "Ah, father, we finally meet," Izuku would say. As All Might's eyes would lay down right onto Izuku, he would have memories flood back into his mind. Izuku, you're my son," All Might would say, realizing who Izuku was, as Izuku would just laugh. "Oh, you finally got it through your big-headed skull of yours. Can't believe your thick skull managed to realize that I'm your son. Could you really just not realize your son, the son of the #1 hero, just happened to become a villain? Could you really just not think that was possible, could you?" Izuku would ask, as All Might would stare on towards him before rushing off, jumping at Izuku before throwing a punch that would land directly to Izuku's chest. However, nothing would happen. As Izuku would only smile on towards All Might, he would punch him square across the face, sending him flying across the USJ, flying into the same set of stairs that he had once been standing on. All Might would barely be able to pull himself out of the rubble, staring on at his son, just in complete shock. He hasn't seen him in over 10 years, and he's changed so much. A young, quirkless boy is now turned into a monster. He still looked like the same Izuku he had seen all those years ago. However, scars littered his body now. Izuku would create a portal as his entire body would suddenly turn into some weird sort of person, kind of mimicking the look of Kurogiri. As he'd open a portal, he'd fall right through it. As soon as he stopped using his portal quirk, he'd turn right back into his normal self, before throwing a punch directly at All Might. So All Might would barely be able to dodge such a punch. Izuku would twist his body before throwing a thunderbolt, landing it directly in All Might's weak spot. "All for One told me about your weak spot, father," don't think I'm not gonna use it against you. I'm not gonna play by the rules with you, he would say as All Might would jump into action, still in extreme pain, both emotionally and physically. His own son was now fighting him in basically a life or death scenario, and now he was going to have to make the choice whether to die or have his son die. It was such a hard decision that just was wrapped up in his mind constantly, all while he was fighting his son, trying to maintain his life, that too. As Izuku would keep on throwing punches, All Might would try to match them, either blocking them or catching the punches. As Izuku would keep on going relentlessly, going on as Shigaraki would just be watching in amazement. However, from behind, Izuku would see in the corner of his eye someone sneaking up on Shigaraki as he would jump back, not being able to use any of his other quirks while in his portal mode, throwing a or just creating a portal right under Shigaraki, as Shigaraki would fall through the portal, now at the just villain hideout, as he would slam his hands down onto the table, saying, "No! Damn it! Why did Izuku send me back here? The fight was just about to get interesting," he would yell to himself as All for One would start talking over the TV. "I have a feeling he sent you back here because someone was about to attack you from the behind. Izuku wouldn't want for you not to see the show. I've seen him grow up here. I know what he'd want," All for One would say, as we now cut back to the fight, as Izuku would continue on beating on All Might, as all of a sudden Izuku would see sparks flying out of the corner of his eye again, as Bakugo Katsuki would come out of nowhere, slamming an explosion right down into Izuku. However, it did nothing at all, as Izuku would twist his head back, as Bakugo would be looking on in shock, just wondering how could this wasn't Izuku, at least not the one he had known when he was 4. There was no chance someone who's quirkless could take something like this, as Izuku's body entirely would twist, as Izuku would grab the neck of Bakugo, slamming him into All Might, as both of them would be sent flying back due to the kick of Izuku right after slamming them both into each other. As both of them would be sent flying back, All Might would stand up yelling that Bakugo needs to get everyone out of here. This isn't his fight, and even if it was, he would surely die at the end of it. All Might would say as Bakugo, telling me just couldn't leave him here. "I can't leave you here, All Might. You're going to die," Bakugo would say as All Might would stare down with a cold gaze on towards Bakugo. "Very well, just get everyone out of here," he would yell furiously as Bakugo would have shivers down his spine. All Might now seemed like it was a life or death scenario and he wasn't having anything else. As All Might would go for another punch, this time at full power, yelling. He was going 100% plus ultra, just trying to manage to even scratch Izuku. However, it just wasn't the case, as every punch, nothing would happen, as Izuku would keep on taking the punches, tanking them, as nothing would end up working, as Izuku would jump back, sending piles of thunderbolts flying on towards All Might, as they would all strike him, electrocuting him, making him weaker and weaker and weaker. Izuku was only toying with All Might. If he wanted, he could have just sent one massive thunderbolt, killing All Might and the rest of the people in there with it in one go. However, he didn't want to do that. Something within him was holding him back from doing so. As Izuku would continue on toying with All Might, Bakugo would end up meeting up with Todoroki. Bakugo would suddenly have a realization, knowing what had been happening with these heroes now, having seen All Might in a life or death mode, as he would finally tell Todoroki if they were going to beat Izuku, it was going to be together. As Shoto Todoroki would look on before nodding his head as they would start to come up with a plan. So all of a sudden they would see the flailing body of All Might be sent flying overhead of them, as Todoroki would look on in shock. "How are we gonna beat that?" he'd yell. However, all of a sudden, tons more heroes would arrive on the scene. However, Izuku would grab a thunderbolt, not having it, yelling for all of them to stay back, would throw it right at them, scattering them instantly, sending them flying backwards, as many of them would hit their heads on stones or just being knocked out from the electrocution. Overall, Izuku didn't kill them, though. The thunderbolt wasn't as powerful as it could have been. Again, something was holding Izuku back from killing them, and Izuku didn't even realize it. As All Might would look up as all of the reinforcements that had arrived had being decimated, all gone in an instant, as Bakugo would jump in, throwing an explosion at Izuku, his most powerful explosion. It would burn Izuku's body on one of his arms, however it would instantly regrow within an instant. So Bakugo would look on in shock, just wondering, how are we supposed to beat this thing? He would yell, throwing 2 more punches down at Izuku with explosions. However, they weren't going to do anything, as Izuku would uppercut Bakugo with both of his fists before jumping up towards the Bakugo who was in the air, slamming his fists down into Bakugo's head, sending him flying back down. As Bakugo's gaze would start to be dizzy, as he just wasn't sure what was happening, as just being completely dazed by how hard of Izuku's attack was. As Bakugo would look up towards the Izuku who's standing above him, All Might would jump out of nowhere, tackling Izuku, sending him flying down to the ground into some of the rubble, as Izuku would yell for All Might to let go of him, throwing his hand right into All Might's skull, repeatedly keep on punching him. However, All Might wasn't having that, as All Might would yell, "Now, Todoroki!" As Todoroki would jump out of nowhere, as All Might would peel off, as Todoroki would slam his foot on the ground, freezing Izuku in a solid block of ice. As all of them would look on in complete shock, just wondering, is it over? So many of them would sit down, finally resting, as Izuku had completely just been frozen. All of his movements, he couldn't break out of a solid iceberg, as that's what happened. Izuku was completely stuck in the iceberg. As finally more reinforcements would end up arriving, taking all of the injured or just defeated villains back, as All Might would stare on through the iceberg at his son, just wondering what could have happened to this. What made him this way? As of this be happening, All Might knew that if they were going to end up getting him out of the ice, they would end up having to just have a quirk racing zone. And so would end up just starting to build around a cube around this ice of Izuku, having Todoroki there at all times to freeze Izuku's iceberg continuously whenever it would start melting. So once the quirkless zone was complete, they tasked Todoroki to send just fire in to melt his ice. Todoroki would be reluctant to, however, he would melt all of the ice as... Alright, so, All Might, you need to go in there and place the quirk-canceling handcuffs on him just in case this quirkless stuff doesn't work, All Might would say, as All Might would go in there only to see Izuku was completely passed out due to the ice. As All Might would go in there, carefully placing the quirk-canceling handcuffs on Izuku, as he would then pick Izuku and then putting him in the back of an armored vehicle, as it would then drive off into a very secure and remote location far away from the UA campus. Once they would stop there, All Might would get out of the truck, grabbing onto Izuku, who was still asleep, before moving him into a quirk-canceling room made out of the same material that the quirk-canceling handcuffs was on. As this would be happening, All Might would end up seeing just Izuku there. However, All Might was behind some glass, staring on at his only son. He just didn't get it. How could his only son become this? You would think, as he would be just looking directly on at Izuku, just completely confused and conflicted. He would bring Inko there to see their son, hoping that Inko would hopefully just get a feeling that finally she gets to see her son after so long. Calling her, he would then drive out to this remote location, which just happened to be a block, the same quirkless block, basically, that they had made around Izuku in the USJ, and it was in the middle of nowhere, miles away from any civilization. So even if Izuku were to escape, it was going to cause him to try to run out, and most likely die of dehydration or hunger. So with that, Izuku would be seen just in this block as Inko would end up arriving, staring on at the glass. However, she would see Izuku wake up, not being able to see them as it was only one-way glass. She would rush over to the door as Might would yell for her to stop. She would open the door before rushing to Izuku, jumping into him, saying, "Izuku, I'm so glad to see you," she would say as tears would start falling out of her eyes, as Izuku would only blankly stare at her. "I'm sorry, who are you again?" Izuku would say. However, once she would pick her head up, feeling her face, memories would come flying back, hitting Izuku in the head like a truck, as all of a sudden he would start seeing all of these just memories of this green-haired lady. However, he still didn't recognize her. He still had these memories of her, but he just didn't recognize her at all. He had this feeling he should know who she was, like he'd seen her years ago, like she had a connection with him. However, he had no clue who she was, as Inko would start crying, saying that she's his mother. "Don't you know, Izuku? I'm your mom," she would say, as Izuku would only shake his head. I don't think you're my mother. You might be." "Stop playing with me," Izuku would say, tossing her off of Miss Inko would look on it in complete shock that her baby, her child, her only son, had completely forgotten about her. She would just shake her head as tears would start falling off her face once more. "No, you can't be Izuku. You can't be. Izuku would know who I am. Surely. I'm his mother, after all," she would say, as Izuku would only glare on towards her, as he would look towards the way glass before telling All Might to be gone with her, as All Might would walk into the room, picking her up or quickly rushing out so Izuku didn't try toying or pulling anything. So with that happening, we then see Aizawa along with Nezu end up arriving, as Nezu would end up walking into the room with Izuku before studying him intently, as Izuku would just be sitting there calmly, not even trying to attack Nezu. Nezu would be looking on at Izuku, just wondering what was up with him. "Why aren't you attacking me? You did try to kill All Might after all. And you've critically injured him, even after the all-for-one fight, too. He can't even use his quirk anymore." Much like how All Might just couldn't use his quirk after basically the just fight with All for One, All Might right there would actually listen to Sir Night-Eye and would give All for One to Mirio, so he wouldn't have to worry about just anything with being just having died or not being able to transfer One for All to anyone. So with that, Nezu would be talking to Izuku, who would just shrug his shoulders. "I have no reason to attack you, Nezu. I know you're the principal of UA. I just don't have a point to attack you at all, that's it. If I really wanted to attack you or possibly kill you, I could have done it 5 minutes ago," Izuku would say, as Nezu would only stare on at Izuku, still just intently looking at him, just walking around him, just as if studying him. So, do you mind telling me what your life story is?" "Oh, that should be quite easy," Izuku would say, however wouldn't reply with anything else after that. So with that, Izuku would be transferred into an armored car, not after being put on a special new device that would go around Izuku's neck, much like a dog collar. However, it was a quirk-canceling collar, so that Izuku could use his hands and not have to be held up by just the, not just have to be held up by the handcuffs. So with that, Izuku would be transferred into the Class 1A dorms. Nezu, after seeing that Izuku didn't attack him, or All Might, or even Inko, his mother, when they walked into the room, so he decided to give it a chance to just put him into Class 1A's dorms, just to try to see if anything would happen, as Nezu wanted to see if he can hopefully try to rehab villains with sort of a new type of just technique that he has found, or just try to rehab villains so that he could just see and show Izuku as an example to the public that villains can be changed, and that they're not all just mindless monsters that kill people for fun. Natsu knew this and wanted to hopefully try to show the public that a rehab system could be in order to try to save some of these villains that Nezu deemed weren't too far off from still being normal civilians. So Nezu would look on towards Izuku. However, Izuku would still just not care, as Nezu's now in the armored car would start asking Izuku questions. So, Izuku, do you mind telling me what happened to those 5 students that got kidnapped at the USJ? Nezu would say, as Izuku would shake his head. Nope, I don't have a clue where I sent them. Oh, so you sent them somewhere? Yes, I did. I sent them to a warehouse, actually. I'll let you find wherever that warehouse is. But by now, they're probably being experimented on already. Nezu would shake his fist in anger, however he would look on towards Izuku. Do you know how much trouble I'm going to be in if I don't find them? Oh yeah, I know the public's going to be quite mad at you for losing 5 students. However, I can't help you with that one. However, I do know some very priceless information. Nezu would look intently at Izuku as if he was about to say something. I know a lot of information about the League of Villains. I know quite a lot of it. Where the location is, all the experiments they do. However, I have no reason to tell you any of it, because you and I have no loyalty towards each other. So, I don't really need to tell you anything, because you could always just backstab me, and I could always just backstab you. So until we find out a trustworthy scenario, or just get trust in each other, I'm not going to say anything to you, Nezu. Izuku would say as Nezu would just shake his head. Fine, you can go ahead and do so, but don't think we're still going to try and hopefully find them. Oh, but what the villains are going to be doing to them? It can be reversed. It will just take a hell of a lot of time, Izuku would say as Nezu would stare on and at Izuku. So, just in case you see any mindless bird monsters with brains out of their heads, just know that that process that makes them into that can be reversed. What? Nezu would say. What are you talking about, Izuku? Nezu would yell along with all might. I suppose I said too much. But there's something called a Nomu. It's kind of a mindless monster that follows orders blindlessly. I know I was supposed to be one, but I turned out to be sort of a passion project by the doctor. But that doctor was an idiot, and that's why I exist. However, the Nomu things, they can be reversed. However, it takes a long time. A process I have no clue, but I've seen them be reversed before. That's all the information I can tell you. Oh, we're here, Nezu would say, as they would look on to see the UA dorm rooms just all scattered along, as Nezu had decided to build the dorms just before the school year had even started. So with that, Izuku would be walking in, as he would end up being sat on the couch with All Might sitting next to him, as all of the students would be staring, just glaring at Izuku. However, Izuku would just be laughing. Oh, why do you all look so mad? It's not like I somehow was to blame for helping kidnap 5 of your fellow classmates. Izuku would, as all of them would look on in just anger towards Izuku. How dare you do that? Many of them would just think in their head, however, none of them just would have the gut to say it, as Izuku would merely just be smiling at them like he just didn't care that he had a court-canceling collar on him. So Bakugo would end up walking up to Izuku before punching him across the face in anger. However, Izuku would only stare up directly at Bakugo like it didn't even hurt. His shock nullification quirk was being canceled out by this collar, and yet the punch that Bakugo sent at full force didn't hurt him at all, as Izuku could only be staring up at Bakugo before smiling. "Oh, is that all you got, Bakugo? It's a shame you're so weak," Izuku would say before spitting out some blood right at Bakugo, as Bakugo had managed to make one of Izuku's teeth fall out from the direct punch square to where Izuku's jaw, mouth, and sort of cheek was. As the tooth would end up hitting Bakugo square in the eyes, Bakugo would then see the tooth just regenerate out of nowhere, as Izuku would only just be smiling. "I suppose you can't cancel my regeneration quirk with this. Or possibly you just canceled out too many quirks with this quirk canceling thing of device on me. I don't think it could cancel around 5 quirks at once. I'd probably be putting too much stress on it. So I suppose it malfunctioned and allowed for my regeneration quirk to still be active." "Oh well," Izuku would say, as Bakugo would only glare in anger and would go for a second punch, however it would be blocked by All Might. "Not so fast, Bakugo. Calm down. Not right now. You don't want to make him angry. Trust me," All Might would say, as Izuku would only smile back at Bakugo, as Bakugo would be forced to walk back and sit on the opposite couch. "This might be quite hard for you, but you're going to have to get used to Izuku being here. He's going to be... how do I say this? He's going to be most likely a permanent member here with Class 1A, as he's going to be joining the UA rehab program that's newly been created. And hopefully he can turn him into a hero and change some of the twisted ideals that he had with spending so much time with All for One." Izuku would only look at just Nezu before just shaking his head. "You're gonna have the hell of a hard time trying to twist my mind, Nezu," Izuku would say. However, deep down, all of his ideas and ideals were being twisted, as he just couldn't understand anything. It was like all of his life was a lie, like he was living 2 lives, like he wasn't supposed to be where he was right now. As Nezu would end up putting Izuku into a quirk-canceling room up at the top of the UA Class 1A dorms, as it would end up being supervised by Aizawa and other heroes 24/7. However, Izuku would go down and sit on a mattress that was the only thing in the room, as he would end up just staring down at his hands in complete confliction. He didn't understand anything. This just doesn't make any sense. It's like my whole life was a lie. Zuku's shaking his head, as he would put one of his hands up to his head, shaking his forehead. Was everything All for One's telling me? Was it all just a lie? Sure, All might be my father, but that green-haired lady, what was her name again? Inko. My mother. This just doesn't make any sense, Izuku would say, shaking his head once again. As this would be happening, as Izuku's minds and thoughts were being twisted, everything All for One was telling him and taught him, it was all just a lie. All for One was lying to him this entire time. And yet he just couldn't understand it, the sudden realization that All for One was lying to him. But yet, All Might never came to save him. His own father never came to save him. Izuku's intelligence quirk would be kicking in, as that was another quirk that just couldn't be canceled out. It was most likely because they just couldn't find me, but All for One lying to me. I forgot about my own mother. It's just it's so confusing, Izuku would say. As Izuku would end up seeing his door be opened, so he would see All Might walk into his room. However, Izuku would get up, standing up. As All Might would see Izuku standing up, as he would get on guard, puffing into his Big Might form. However, his quirk, he could still barely use it, but it was like he didn't even have the cork anymore. So Izuku would rush towards All Might. All Might would punch Izuku square in the neck, which just happened to be perfectly placed, breaking the device around him as Izuku would knock All Might out, as he would end up turning the corner, jumping out of a window, or using a portal to teleport into one of the cities around him, as Izuku would end up just landing on top of a rooftop before just looking around. I guess this city is something, huh? Izuku would say to himself, staring down at everything. The villains, they all lied to me. But this corrupt society, all the examples they showed me, they were real, but they never showed me anything All Might had done. They never showed me any of the good examples of what heroes did. The society's such a corrupt one, isn't it? Izuku would ask himself, as Izuku would stare down on to the roads just below him, just wondering, thinking about how corrupt this society has become. The villains and the heroes, neither sides are right. I guess it's now up to me to figure out how to stop them, huh? Izuku would ask. Having seen his mother had just completely changed Izuku. The emotionless Izuku had completely changed after seeing his mother, and finally realizing who his mother was and who All Might was. He realized what he had done. However, he didn't trust the heroes, and now he didn't trust the League of Villains either. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would end up staring down at the alleyway that was right beneath him, as he would end up seeing Stain, the hero killer, standing directly in there with the hero now in his grasp, about to just injure the hero. However, Izuku would jump down, staring on at Stain, as Stain would ask who Izuku was. For Izuku would shake his head. "That's not the point right now, Stain," Izuku would say, before twisting his arm, knocking out the hero behind him. "Why do you choose to injure and kill all of these heroes?" Izuku would say. "Don't you think you can at least just make it so that you can try to change their ideals at least a little bit? Threaten them? Why do you choose to kill them, or possibly injure them beyond repair? Just taking them away from their families," Izuku would say, questioning on towards Stain. However, Stain would just shake his head. "It doesn't matter right now, Izuku. It doesn't matter." Stain would say, as Stain had had an encounter with Shigaraki, as Shigaraki would ask Stain to bring Izuku back to the League of Villains, just saying that they need to talk with him, and in exchange, Stain would get money so that he could continue on repairing all of his swords and all of that whenever they got broken when they were fighting one of the just a hero. As Stain would jump on towards Izuku, taking out his sword, he would go to slash Izuku. Right as Stain slashes his sword towards Izuku, Izuku catches the blade, crushing it within his fist. As Stain's sword falls down to the ground in pieces, he stands up back at Izuku before jumping back, now with his backup sword in his hand. "Calm down, Stain," Izuku would say. "I would like you to take me back to their warehouse, just so you can get the reward. I've been meaning to go back there. I've just not really decided to yet." Stain would nod his head before cautiously walking up towards Izuku, as Stain would then lead Izuku towards wherever the villain hideout was, even though Izuku already knew where it was in the first place. So with that, Izuku would walk into the villain hideout before sitting down right next to Shigaraki. "Ah, Izuku, welcome back. I've been waiting for your arrival and return. I knew those heroes couldn't keep you there for long. I knew you were strong enough to get past even All Might's grasp. So I had faith in you." Izuku would just slowly nod his head before asking Shigaraki to take him to the 5 students that they had kidnapped. Shigaraki would nod his head before just shooing off, staying, giving him his reward, as Shigaraki would then lead Izuku off to wherever they kept the 5 UA students. As he would lead them down there, he would then walk into a massive room where the doctor was busily at work, just putting things into different test tubes and all of that, doing different tests. As Izuku would look on into just the massive pillars filled with fluid, he would see that there was 5 just bird monsters all in there. As he would see the names written on them, as they were Tokiyami, Kaminari, Tsuyuasui, Ejiro Kirishima, and Mina Ashido. As Izuku would look on at them, Shigaraki would then smile. They happen to be some of the strongest quirks we've seen, and plus the enhancement quirk and the healing quirk, they've all gotten quite strong, Shigaraki would say, as Izuku would nod his head. So you think I'll be quite the asset for us when we go and attack UA the next time, huh? Izuku would say as Shigaraki would then nod his head. Oh, yes, of course. It will be quite good for all of those UA students to see their former classmates become Nomus and see what they'll eventually become later on, Shigaraki would say as Izuku would nod his head, as Izuku would go back to his room where it had just been kept the same. As he would sit down on his bed, he would start to think long and hard. Should I stay with the villains or go back to the heroes? Or should I just become a vigilante? Izuku would think to himself, not quite sure. The heroes were insanely corrupt, only doing things for the fame and money. However, there were some very small, just good apples in the group that just did it for saving people. And however, one of those being All Might, or the biggest one of that, however, ended up just retiring after his fight with Izuku. And the villains, many of them just are there to be villains, while a lot of the time it's because they need to do things to support their family and other things, or they've just been led down that path by bullying and other things. So Izuku really just couldn't decide. However, Izuku made up his mind. He wasn't going to become a hero, however, he was going to become sort of a villain in the eyes of the law. However, with his enhanced intelligence quirk, Izuku realized that the best wouldn't be to be a hero or a villain. He wasn't going to be able to do what he wanted to do in just a lawful or legal way, so Izuku had to make something up to do it. So Izuku basically just formed his own government in his own head, which, with his insanely intelligent quirk, it was quite easy for him. So Izuku now, with his intelligence quirk and what he wanted to do, he knew he would have to stay with the villains and go along with their plan until he could end up just finding a way to overthrow it and eventually end up creating his own government or whatever he wanted to do eventually. So with that, Izuku would end up walking back down to just the main area of the base before speaking to Shigaraki. So, Shigaraki, what are your plans to do as a hero? Or not a hero, sorry, villain. I've kind of gotten mixed up after being with all those heroes for so long. So what do you plan on doing as a villain after All Might's dead? Oh, that's quite the question. I plan to kill anyone that doesn't go along with my ways. The villain way. So I'll form this world into what I see fit with it. Izuku would frown before nodding his head. Alright. So, what's our next plan of action? Oh, we're going to attack UA during the UA Sports Festival. Here, Shigaraki would say, handing Izuku a paper flyer that he had found. So, the UA Sports Festival is happening in just around a week. Huh. So we're going to attack them, and I presume right at the medal ceremony. Izuku would ask as Shigaraki would nod his head. Oh, the look on all of those kids' faces when they see their own classmates and friends turned into monsters. Izuku would nod his head, just smiling, hoping to trick Shigaraki to think, oh, he's going along with my plan and likes it at that, too. So with that, Izuku would walk back up to his room to just go ahead and think about all of the just planning that they were going to have to do to attack UA once again. So after this, Izuku would end up just having a week pass as he was now sitting with Shigaraki. "You ready, Shigaraki?" Izuku would ask as he would nod. "Alright, well, why don't we go ahead and start this?" Izuku would nod his head, going into his portal mode, as he would then create a portal right in front of all of them. As Izuku would walk through, Shigaraki would give the order for all of the Nomus to walk through as well, so they would all walk through right in front of the medal ceremony, as hundreds more villains would then pile out of just the portal as well, as heroes would jump down from the roofs of the the UA Sports Festival Coliseum, so they would all start to fight the villains. However, Izuku had managed to put a portal beneath all of them before putting a portal up above at the top of the UA Sports Festival Coliseum, where they would all just be standing there watching as the chaos would unfold, as none of the heroes were still up there, having jumped down already. So they would all be standing up there watching the chaos, as many of the villains would start to overpower some of the lower powered heroes that had managed to go there. Since a lot of them weren't like Endeavor, they were around top 50 heroes, they were still quite good, but they weren't top 10. Top 10 heroes were out doing other missions and other things. So these villains started to slowly overpower them just in numbers alone, and so once all of the heroes would slowly, barely end up being able to do that, all of the Nomus would end up being transferred down there along with Izuku and Shigaraki. This is where some of the students that had jumped down to start helping them would look on in complete and utter shock. That's our classmates. Many of them would realize due to the similarities that some of them had, as they could easily recognize all of the Nomus, as they looked quite similar. So they could easily recognize Tokiyami, Kirishima, Kaminari, Mina, and Yuasui, as they all recognized that this is what their own classmates had become. So would all do this, many of them would act out in a rage, jumping at them. However, Shigaraki would tell the Nomus to go ahead and capture them, not to kill them, but to rather capture them so that they could be used for further experiments. So the Nomus would rush in before capturing them, tying them down with of the cork-canceling tape that they had all been given. These Nomus were trained, after all. They were trained in the orders to know how to tie up people, and so they would easily round up many of the students that were there, as Izuku would all pile them up and throw them through a portal. As many of the low-life heroes, or the above top 10 heroes, would end up being defeated by Izuku to let the other Nomus do their thing, as Izuku would just rush around either punching them, knocking them out, or throwing lightning bolts right at them to just knock them out or put them in a coma so that they couldn't bother the Nomu who was grabbing all of the students. All Might would jump down into his buff form even after retiring and the loss of his quirk, and would try to punch Izuku, but right before he could, he would go back into Small Might form. "I'm sorry, All Might. It's just what's meant to be," Izuku would say. However, very quickly, he would create a smoke cloud, throwing his thunderbolt right down into the ground, sending a huge cloud of dirt flying and fuming into the air. Izuku would create a portal underneath both him and All Might, as Izuku would then be seen in a remote location, as he would then just put All Might there. "All Might, father, stay here," Izuku would say. "I'll speak to you later about this." All Might would be confused, but at the hope that Izuku was possibly changing his mind about being a villain, he would stay there, hoping just to get to speak with his son for at least one more time. And so Izuku, going right back to the Coliseum, would continue on just keeping all of the other heroes at bay. Since all of the other students were gone due to Izuku helping the student Nomus capture all of them, so they really had no other reason to be there, as many of the other heroes would try to come in. However, Izuku again would just keep them back, and so Izuku would then fall back into a portal along with Shigaraki and the 5 other Nomus, as they would while be doing this, Izuku would ask Shigaraki if Izuku can question all of those just heroes, or the heroes in training, that is. So Izuku would take them all down towards a basement warehouse-type dungeon-looking thing, where he would have the Nomus sit them up into a core-canceling chair where they would be tied down to it, as Izuku would start to question them. So, heroes, do you mind telling me, what do you plan on doing with your life as a hero? Or do you fancy being a villain at all? Izuku would say, questioning many of them. All of them would say that they did not want to become a hero at all, and that's why they wanted to become heroes after all. So Izuku would then ask another question. So, why do you plan on becoming a hero? Izuku would ask, as many of them would just start to think. Izuku would tell them that they have 5 seconds to answer, as he would point to Bakugo. Bakugo would say to smash villains' heads in, as Izuku would just look back down at him. You don't think trying to become a hero, you'd want to save people, but rather not just for the chaos and fighting that comes with being a hero? Bakugo Katsuki? Who cares? How about you? Todoroki would calmly say save people, and that's what many other people would end up saying there. So Izuku would end up rolling in a projector before just creating just a slideshow where he would then show many of the people there the corruptness that is being a hero. As Izuku was seeing this, many of the students would look on in shock and would start to become just in denial. No, these aren't heroes, they can't be. As Izuku would continue on showing even newspapers and videos about heroes killing innocent people in the line of fire, not caring, being just cocky and throwing attacks everywhere, trying to eat a villain without caring about the common good of the people, killing many of them in the crossfire of it as well. As many of would see this and just would look on in shock, as Izuku would end up asking them all. So, I don't like being a villain. It's, at least for the ways under Shigaraki, the blue-haired fellow. So I decided to create my own organization. It's called being a vigilante. So, how many of you would like to join it? We'd be doing it for the people. We wouldn't make any money, of course, and we'd be breaking the law. So, how about that? You'd still be considered villains in the eyes of the law, but you aren't killing anyone, that is. We're only just trying to make this world a better place here, and try to cut back on all of the corruptness in this hero society. Some of them Izuku would have the Nomus break off all of the restraints, as Izuku would then ask them, why don't you go ahead and stand up and walk over towards me and turn around and face your fellow classmates if you decide to join me? I want this world to become a better place for the kids and the next generations. I don't want it to become some fiery wasteland filled with being corrupt. That just simply wouldn't do, would it? Many of the students would stand up. However, many of them would shake their heads, saying that they just couldn't live with someone who turned their own classmates into those Nomus. However, Izuku ended up staring right at them, just giving them a straight answer. You know your classmates here. Tokiyami, was it? Or at least one of them was named that. You know, this process can be reversed. It will take time, but it can be reversed after all. I don't want the fact that I've hurt your classmates before to harm your just opinion about this. Many more students would end up standing up, as finally only one student was left sitting there, as it was Bakugo Katsuki, as he would stare on at the kid that he had bullied for only around a day, as he would stare at Izuku Midoriya. So, will we at least get to fight people? Oh, well, that's quite the question. You know, you'd get to fight twice as more people as you would as a hero, Bakugo. You'd get to fight villains and heroes. You just can't kill them, that is. Bakugo would finally stand up, as Izuku had managed to get all of the classes, or all of the students in that class, to become onto his side. So, You guys will just have to remember this. Sadly, my plan just has you all becoming Nomus, of course. This makes you all will get extra quirks, that is. So you should just be happy. Anyway, I'll be gone. The doctor will now see all of you. As Izuku would snap as the Nomus would rush in, tying all of them down, as many of them would just be like, wait, what? We're becoming Nomus? They would all ask, just in synchrony in their heads, like, wait, this wasn't a part of the deal, was it? As all of them would then be taken where the doctor was and being thrown in these giant tubes of liquid, as their body would start to shift and mold into a sort of monster capable of being able to hold all of these corks. And so with that, their bodies would turn into these just different types of Nomus, as Izuku would even be standing there watching as this process would slowly begin transforming what looked like normal people into just monsters, something you'd seen in a horror film. Izuku would end up walking out of the room, not wanting to see it no longer, as he would end up going up to Shigaraki. Alright, Shigaraki, what other plan do you have to do? I just realized, if Stan gets captured, he doesn't really like villains at all. What do you think would happen if you were to tell all of those heroes where our location happens to be? So, Izuku, why don't you go out and find that stupid Stain and bring him back here for me, will you? Izuku would look at Shigaraki before nodding his head. Alright, Shigaraki, I guess I'll do that. Izuku would walk out of the door before jumping off around the alleyways, just looking for Stain and wherever he could be. As we now cut to see Shigaraki walking down into the basement where the doctor's experiments were located. Ah, Doctor, please tell me, have you managed to finish all of the Nomu or the 1A project? The doctor would look over towards Shigaraki before smiling, just an insane smile, opening up his arms wide before yelling, "Ah, yes! All of these Nomus have been finished. Ah, luckily they're quite the powerful ones, too. We've gotten the good role of Izuku here, bringing in all of these people in. This Nomu army is growing quite fast, isn't it, Shigaraki?" Shigaraki would nod his head before walking back, however, he'd just be mad that Izuku just had to go out at the word of himself, too, to go and find Stain. He wanted to get a portal to go over to wherever All For One is to speak with him about the 1A project. So with that, we now cut back to see Izuku hopping from building to building, where he inevitably ends up finding Stain. So, Stain, we finally meet again, Izuku would say as he sees Stain now hovering over Tenya Ida's brother, Tensei. I believe that's his name. So, Izuku, I see you finally decided to meet me again. Over before Stain could even finish his sentence, Izuku would kick Stain right in the back, sending him flying the other way, sending him flying right into a dumpster, hitting the top of it, so the top of the dumpster would then close right onto Stain. However, as soon as he caught up, he would fly out of the dumpster right at Izuku, a sword now lifted above his head as if he was about to slash down on Izuku. However, Izuku would dodge Stain's attack. "That's not going to work on me, Stain," Izuku would say, jumping backwards before lifting both of his hands up with a thunderbolt in both hands, throwing him down as they would all fly down, crashing into Stain, electrocuting him as he would then get knocked out. Izuku would end up picking Stain up before tying him up, throwing him through the portal, as Shigaraki would then see Stain fall into a portal, as Shigaraki would then see Stain directly right in front of him. "Ah, Stain, finally we get to meet again." However, Shigaraki would get no response since Stain happened to be unconscious. Right as Shigaraki was about to do anything, two people would end up walking through the door. These would of course be Dabi and Toga. "Ah, hello. Who do you happen to be?" Shigaraki would ask, as both of them would just look on towards him. "Oh, well, we want to become villains," Dabi would say, as Toga would then jump in the air. "Oh, yeah, villains. That's what we want to be." as Shigaraki would nod his head before just saying, "Alright, you're in. Just sit down and do whatever. I don't care. Just don't disobey me. I hate people that don't listen to orders," Shigaraki would say as they shrugged their shoulders, so they would then sit on a couch right behind Shigaraki. "Alright, that works for me," they would say, as we now look back to see Izuku just running around the city looking for any of the corrupt heroes that he had done quite the research on. As Izuku had decided to research just corrupt heroes, as he had even asked Stain sometimes while Stain was walking back with Izuku towards the villain hideout just a couple of days prior. So with that, Izuku would end up rushing around the city, finding corrupt heroes, and just asking them what their deal was and why they didn't care about saving people. However, Izuku would end up getting no response, so he would end up just knocking them out and running around, just really not doing anything. As Izuku was really just acting on anger, he had seen something that had completely shocked him, as he ended up seeing in one of the newspapers and even on the news that a preschool had been completely decimated by a flailing and flying attack by a hero that was careless, which just completely shocked Izuku. How could a hero, someone who's meant to save lives, kill so many, and the public, they just didn't care? Oh, he was stopping a villain. It's just what happens. Izuku just would be so shocked. How could the public not care about this? It was just completely shocked and boggled Izuku's mind. It just didn't make any sense to him. As all of this would end up happening, Izuku would walk back towards Shigaraki as Izuku would look on towards him. "Ah, Shigaraki. So, I'm guessing the Nomus have finally been complete." We cut back to, or just around right after Izuku had dropped off all of the students at the doctor's place, where he would end up going through a portal and meeting up with All Might in the warehouse. "Ah, Father, we finally meet again," Izuku would say, as All Might would yell at Izuku, saying, "What have you done, Izuku? You can't go back you can't even try to become a hero anymore after this." However, Izuku would shush All Might. "Father, you know I never wanted to become a hero. Well, not after seeing how corrupt this society is. I might have wanted to become a hero when I was 4. But that's a 4-year-old me, not now. I've seen how corrupt this hero society was. But luckily, my own father wasn't one of the corrupt ones. That's why I'm asking you, All Might, Toshinori Yagi, to join my group, my league." Izuku would be saying this. All Might would just question him even further. "You're creating a villain league?" All Might would ask as Izuku would calmly shake his head. "Oh, quite the contrary, actually. I'm creating a league that's bent on stopping the corrupt heroes and defeating villains that have no reason to be villains only for the fun of it, and will be just allowing for people that really need help to join our ranks. I want to help this world, and becoming a hero isn't going to do it. As if I'm a hero, how am I going to take down all of those corrupt ones?" Izuku would say, clenching his fist, as All Might would just shake his head. "You might have a point with that, Izuku. Your ideas and ideals, they might get quite hard for me to get used to. But, fine. I guess I'll go ahead and help you. I've seen it quite throughout the years of being a hero. I've seen all of the corrupt people. Everyone that's just done it for the fun of it, or done it for the fame and money, instead of just trying to save as many people as possible. I can't believe what I've seen during my time as a hero. My own hero agency, even. They told me if I were to tell anyone about this or expose any of those heroes, I'd be ruined. Like, no one would even care. only caring that I tried to ruin a hero's reputation, making up lies. I guess you're quite right about the society being corrupt, Izuku. However, your ways... Are you trying to kill anyone? All Might would question even further. All Might would end up just explaining all about one of his students, Mirio, and how they need to find him so that he can join their ranks as well, as Mirio has his quirk one for all, and it's going to become quite the strong quirk too. Izuku would nod his head before asking All Might to go and find Mirio so that they can meet up in a different off-site location. All Might would rush off to go find Mirio, and for some reason, he didn't tell anyone else. He trusted Izuku, his own son, even after Izuku had shown just true acts of villainy. Just the hope that his own son was coming over to the light side was too strong for Izuku or All Might to look past. And so he would end up going and finding Mirio and bringing him back to the warehouse. So, Mirio, All Might, why'd you bring me here with this villain? No, don't tell me you're one of the villains too. Calm down, Mirio, All Might's striking voice would say. So you would stop yelling at All Might. All Might would tell him to listen to what Izuku was trying to say. This is my son, Izuku. You may have seen him. He wants to stop all of the corruptness in this hero society. You know how I told you about all of the corruptness and how you need to stick with all of the ideals that I taught you. Well, he wants to break those ideals. Or not those ideals, but break the hero society along with all of the corrupt heroes and rebuild it to make it not corrupt at all. Izuku, who end up nodding his head after All Might would explain this to Mirio. It sounds quite noble, but wouldn't this be all illegal? Defeating villains, we'd sound like... or defeating heroes and villains. We'd still be villains in the eyes of the law, wouldn't we? Mirio would say as Izuku would sadly nod his head. Sadly, yes. But it's for the greater good, of course. So we might be fugitives for a while until the public starts to turn in our favor. But hopefully that should happen quite soon. Mirio would nod his head for just sighing. I should possibly go out and try to find the big three to explain this to them. Izuku would then look right back at Mirio, calmly telling both All Might and Mirio, you both need to go back to UA and act like nothing ever happened. Wait, what about Class 1A? All Might would say. Izuku would not just say, oh, they're fine. Don't worry about it. Don't say this to anyone else in case they try to spread anything, as I'm still in the League of Villains after all. I need to overthrow them, of course, Izuku would say, as he would then walk out of the building before just rushing off to go and find the hero that happened to destroy an entire preschool with one of his flailing fireballs, and this just happened to be Endeavor. As Izuku would end up finding Endeavor, Endeavor would end up going in to fight Izuku. Endeavor had heard about how All Might had failed to defeat Izuku, so he wanted to defeat him to show that he was himself better than All Might. So he would go in, sending a massive wave of fire barreling on towards Izuku, before just rushing off, going back, as Izuku would continue on chasing Endeavor, before finally, all of a sudden, a massive spotlight would end up being blazed down onto Izuku, as Endeavor was nowhere to be seen. As Izuku would look all around him, as he would end up seeing just hundreds of heroes along with police officers all surrounding him. His intelligence quirk, it had been completely shielded by the complete hatred that Izuku felt towards Izuku, completely acting on his own emotions. Izuku Midoriya, put your hands up, they would say. Izuku puts his hands in the air before being told to walk towards a couple of heroes. Izuku would do this as they would then put quirk-canceling handcuffs onto Izuku's hands, before shoving him into a quirk-canceling cop car, which was specially made and armored so that no villain, no matter how powerful, could manage to escape. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would be driven down before being shoved into an interrogation room with even more cork-canceling technology. As Izuku would be sitting in the table with his handcuffs just tied down to the table so he basically couldn't get up, all of a sudden Nezu would walk into the room before sitting down very calmly. All of a sudden, he would raise his hand and slam his fist down onto the table. "Damn it, Izuku, tell me where the hell Class 1A is," he would say. However, Izuku would only shake his head. "Oh, if I were going to tell you that, Nezu, you'd sure be disappointed, as you'd find that Class 1A is already turned into Nomus. You're not going to ever get them back," Izuku would say as Nezu then reach across the table, punching Izuku square across the face. "It's not what I want to hear from you, Deku," he would yell as Izuku just smile. "Oh, so now using a fabled nickname from long ago. It's quite the thing, huh? Can't believe the news actually adopted that name, huh? So now you're referring to me as a villain now instead of my real name. Quite the interesting one you are, Nezu, I have to say," Izuku would say. Nezu would just shake his head. "Stop messing around, damn it! Tell me where the hell my students are." All of a sudden, Aizawa would walk into the room before putting his hand on Nezu's shoulder. "Nezu, calm down. You don't have to be doing this right now," he would say as Nezu would only shake his head. "I have to know where Class 1A is. You always be lit on fire if something like this were to continue. Right now, the public still thinks they're just being kept in UA because of that. We were able to shut off all the cameras and have everyone out. Can't believe we're somehow managing this. All of our parents are wondering what our kids are. This isn't going to last for long, Aizawa. We have to find out. So we're going to go under. Possibly be thrown in jail, too, for losing their kids." Aizawa would only shake his head before telling Nezu to calm down. "Calm down, Nezu. I'm sure we'll find Class 1A eventually. After all, there is tons of heroes helping the search as of right now, so it's only a matter of time until they're found." Izuku would continue on smiling before being shoved into a jail cell. "Well, if you don't want to tell us where the location is, then we might as well just leave you here," as Izuku would smile before staring directly into Nezu's eyes. "Oh, Class 1A is actually closer than you might think." All of a sudden, a massive explosion would be heard as a massive hole would be seen right in the wall of Izuku's cell, as there stood just around 20 Nomus, all there that each their own just characteristics that made them look exactly like some of Class 1A members. However, they looked like bird monsters. As Nezu and Aizawa would both look on in shock, they would jump in trying to stop Izuku from running away. However, the Bakugo Nomu would jump down, grabbing a hold of Izuku before using explosions to get away, as the rest of the Nomus would follow shortly behind it. As finally Izuku would end up making his way back to the League villains just hide out due to the help of the just 1A Nomus. So with that, Izuku would walk into the bar before seeing Shigaraki smiling. "Ah, I guess you're finally back. Guess the Nomu squad of Class 1A is actually quite useful after all," Shigaraki would say as Izuku would only just smile. "Oh yes, they are quite useful after all," Izuku would say. However, all of a sudden, he would walk right towards Shigaraki before punching him square across the face. Shigaraki would look on just in complete shock as blood would start flowing down Shigaraki's nose. "What the hell, Izuku?" he would say. However, Izuku would smash his fist right back into Shigaraki once again. "What the hell? Why are you doing this?" As Izuku would then slam Shigaraki's head down onto the table, knocking him completely out, as he would then tie him up. All for one up, just watching this on through just the cameras, as he would create a portal, or going there and yelling at Izuku. "What are you doing, Izuku?" he would yell. However, Izuku would jump at All for One, smashing his helmet in, so All for One would jump back, all fully powered up. You made a mistake, Izuku. You shouldn't have crossed me. He would yell, going for a punch, punching Izuku. However, it did nothing because of the shock nullification quirk that he just happened to give him years before. As all of this would be happening, All For One would continue on punching him. However, none of this would end up working. Izuku would continue punching All For One before grabbing a thunderbolt, pushing it down into All For One's stomach. As All For One would yell out in pain before collapsing down to his knees, completely weak. Izuku would have another thunderbolt in his hand before throwing it in direct contact with All For One's head, as he would then fall down to the ground completely unconscious. As Izuku would doing this, he would end up throwing both All For One and Shigaraki down into the basement right in front of the doctor. So, Doctor, why don't you go ahead and begin the process of turning Class 1A back to their normal selves? The doctor would look on in complete shock at Izuku before trying to escape. However, Izuku would then be right in front of him. Oh, don't try to run away. You know I'll end up finding you eventually. Just do what I say. Alright, Izuku would say as the doctor would shakily nod his head. Alright, Izuku. All For One, along with Mirio, would end up walking into the warehouse with Izuku, calling them to come in. As they would walk both of them in, they would see Class 1A and their Nomu forms. However, they would slowly see them turning back into their original forms. So, Izuku, what do you have to plan on now? Well, now we just have to get Nezu back on to our side, huh? As Class 1A, along with the hero program's gonna have to become a lot more, just how do I say this, hard to get into. However, that's not gonna work just yet. We're going to need to get some more influential figures to join our ranks, Izuku would say, as All Might would look at him, for Izuku would end up giving all of Class 1A, along with Mirio, just a list. These were a list of heroes, and Izuku told Class 1A that they're going to have to go out and capture these heroes before just throwing them into a dungeon, or just giving them to Stain the hero killer so they're not the ones that killed him. So, with that, Izuku would up just seeing all of Class 1A along with Mirio run out to go capture villains, or heroes that were acting pretty much like villains. They just didn't care about the well-being of society and only cared for their fame, power, and money. So, just about a week later, the super-powered Class 1A, with all of the new quirks that they got from the Doctor, since they turned into super-powered high-end Nomus, they would all easily be able to capture many of the heroes. As this would be happening, Izuku would end up calling the police, saying that he had found a massive bust with tons of super powerful heroes, and that, or not heroes, but villains, and that they need to send some of the top 10 heroes. As this was all happening, Izuku would stage just the scenery before all of the heroes would end up coming right in, mostly just the top 10 heroes. However, many of them would instantly just be blasted with a quirk-canceling ray, thanks to the Doctor, who had to mate it due to Izuku's request, as they would then just be seated in chairs tied up, as Izuku would then start to question them. With Class 1A standing behind him, Izuku would slowly, one by one, let all of these heroes go. However, he wouldn't let just Endeavor go. Endeavor would yell why he was still being kept in this chair, as Izuku would then just step forward. Oh, Endeavor, you're one of the worst heroes. I know damn well you only care about being a hero for all of the fighting, and I know you wanted to surpass All Might for years, thanks to Todoroki telling me. I also know what you did to your kids. It's not very nice of you, you know. So, Todoroki, why don't you go ahead and tell these heroes are still quite confused on what Endeavor did to you and your family. Izuku would say as Todoroki would nod his head, stepping forward, telling many of the heroes. Many of them were just in shock and were just confused. Izuku wanted to stop all of just the corruptness in hero society, and that really looked like it was just for the common good. They couldn't, stop someone who's doing something for the best of society. many of them at least, wanted to become heroes to save as many people as possible, and this plan Izuku had suggested surely was going to do something the sort of that. So that would all just decide to join Izuku. Izuku just happened to be quite the talker after all with his intelligence quirk, so he knew just the way to persuade all of those heroes into joining him in his ranks. So now with many of the top 10 and Izuku putting Endeavor into just sort of a prison and would have one of the top 10 heroes guard him at all times, just hoping to try to shift him, along with Todoroki standing there as well, trying to teach Endeavor how to actually be a hero. Because sure, he is the hero, but he is still sort of corrupt, and basically he needs to pay for the crimes that he did with abusing his children like Todoroki. So with all of that, Izuku, along with the top 10 heroes, had quite the influence, and when word got out that the top 10 heroes had defected on to the vigilante or the League of Vigilantes side, many of the public would start to support the League of Vigilantes. Also, after Izuku was to hack the news and spread his message. So with that, Izuku would have many of the top 10 heroes going around just spreading the word, while also evading many of the other heroes that tried to stop them, while also convincing many of them to join them as well. As this would be happening, Izuku would be sitting down in the chair and just watching as all of this would be happening, with many monitor screens in front of him, with news articles and just the news playing at full blast. They were blasting the heroes, just saying how corrupt the society was, along with Izuku just giving an entire list of all of the corrupt heroes that he had not captured yet, and just telling all of the reasons why they're corrupt, making the public eye start to hate heroes even more and lean on towards the vigilante side. And it didn't help that the vigilantes were also capturing villains too, while also taking down some of the corrupt heroes within the hero ranks. And so months would end up passing as the public had almost completely shifted on to the League of Vigilantes side, along with the government wanting the people's support as they couldn't win a war without it. So they decided to join the side of the people, which just happened to be the League of Vigilantes. So with that, Nezu was just defeated. He wanted to continue on his hero school, but he knew there was no chance of it. However, when he would end up being led on by Aizawa to go on and meet with Izuku, Aizawa had decided to join Izuku's ranks months before. Since Aizawa had contact with Nezu, he would bring Nezu in to speak with Izuku. Ah, Nezu, it's finally time we end up meeting again. So, the Hero Society shouldn't be destroyed. I just think, well, it should be destroyed from where it is right now, but it should be built from the ground up once again. And that means UA should remain open. However, a test on what the people want, or what the people that are trying to get into want, and what they are trying to get into and become heroes for. Izuku would say as Nezu would nod his head. That sounds easy enough to me. I guess I've just been letting in too much corrupt heroes after all. I've seen throughout the many months of UA just alumni getting captured, all of that just for being corrupt and doing steals or working with villains. So I guess you have a point, Izuku. Izuku, with his vast influence, would then have taken control of UA, and with that, Hero Society was basically just destroyed. They didn't have the backing of the government or even some of the biggest hero schools that joined the likes of Izuku. And so with that, Izuku would begin his major rebuilding process, having all of the corrupt heroes losing their license and becoming civilians, and if they tried to become villains or do anything with their powerful quirks and knowledge, they would just be thrown in jail. And with that, Izuku, along with Nezu and many of his original members, like Class 1A and the top 10 heroes, would become heroes And they would also be some of the higher-ups overseeing many of the newer heroes to make sure their ideals were set and that they just knew why to become a hero, and that was to save as many people as possible. Izuku now becoming a hero as well, even becoming the #1 hero, as with his many powerful quirks, he was easily able to just defeat all of the villains or corrupt defect heroes that had defected towards the villain's side, and Izuku would completely take care of that, and even the crime rate would end up dropping down significantly with the help of Izuku and just the new federation of heroes, the new republic of heroes. I don't really care what you end up calling it. So with that, Izuku becoming the #1 hero and making the world into a better place, making sure that the corruptness within hero society has been taken care of.
And that is where What If Deku Turned Into a Nomu comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy this series, and if you did, please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out. And remember, please comment your what if suggestions down in the comments section below, as I really do enjoy reading them. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.